Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, we focus entirely on Myanmar. From 5 decades of military rule to democratic reform, the winners and losers as the world lines up billions of dollars to invest in the place still known to some as Burma. Rice fields have made way for a new capital, but with change comes challenges. Things like youth unemployment, a throwback to an era when higher education was discouraged. And land grabs with more power to the people. We'll look at how the mining operators have changed Myanmar's local landscape. Hello everyone, just the one topic for you this week as we go in depth and all out on a country called Myanmar. Reclusive and sealed off during its half-century of military rule, but now in the throes of democratic and economic reforms which, if the analysts are to be believed, could completely transform the country. It's a delicate thing though, because even with the US and EU praising the reforms and sanctions being lifted, there's still a lot of concerning stuff happening, ethnic tensions between Buddhists and Muslims which aren't being fully addressed. So how does it all fit together? Well, here's the numbers first. The potential which Myanmar has. An economy which could quadruple in size to $200 billion with annual growth of 8% by 2030. That's according to McKinsey Global Institute. However, to actually get to that point, it's going to need to spend $320 billion or so. But the rewards for the people could be huge. 10 million non-farm jobs could come from all that investment in a country that right now depends on agriculture. Where does all the money come from, though? Well, strategic placement is part of the story. Myanmar has India, China and Thailand as neighbours, which is a pretty good start. In fact, China's invested $14 billion, representing a third of all foreign investment in Myanmar. And despite sanctions over the last 30 years, more than $20 billion has been invested in Myanmar's natural resource projects. There are 30 offshore blocks to auction off right now. And Japan's written off nearly $2 billion in debt from past loans and is contributing more than $500 million for infrastructure projects. In other words, people want in. But we have to go back to the social and political problems which Myanmar has to look at A, how and if business can work in that environment, and B, whether it can actually be part of the reform. Got a whole range of experts lined up on Counting the Cost this week. Tony Fernandez will join us from the World Economic Forum in Myanmar. He's CEO of the budget carrier Air Asia. Also, Hang Cho from the McKinsey Global Institute, which has produced one of the most comprehensive economic reports on Myanmar. Sean Turnell from Macquarie University in Australia, who will speak to the political side of things. And also a quick thought from Helen Clark, the head of the UN Development Programme. Before any of that, though, an in-depth report from Wayne Hay in Myanmar's capital, Naypyidaw. He looks at the issues, the unemployment, the land grabs, the kinds of challenges which can't be ignored amidst all the dollar signs.
The capital city of Myanmar was the brainchild of former military dictator Than Shwe. A deeply superstitious man, it's believed he consulted astrologists before making the decision to move the capital from Yangon to this remote farming area. Rice fields became multi-lane roads that are largely devoid of traffic 8 years after Naypyidaw was officially declared the capital. Myanmar's move to democracy is also still a work in progress. But organisers of the World Economic Forum say there are enough encouraging signs.
Well, I think it was very important early on in the reform process to be here and to give a strong signal on the importance of leveraging investments which will inevitably increase in the months ahead responsibly and for inclusive growth.
But some critics say the rush by foreign governments and companies to start doing business here is happening too quickly.
The government has been rewarded for its reforms, with most sanctions against it lifted or suspended. But many political and social problems remain, including the ongoing detention of political prisoners and the regular attacks taking place against Muslim communities around the country.
Proponents say one of the keys to solving those problems is investment and development. Beyond the new hotels and highways, Naypyidaw is basically still a large farming community. Many people had to move to make way for the new city, and some are still waiting for compensation for land they lost.
I feel very sad about not being compensated for the loss of my land. I submitted applications but haven't received anything.
Others say there are now more job opportunities and people trust what the government is doing.
People are not complaining about the government as much as they did in the past because now we feel more free. Also, the authorities are helping farmers a lot.
One of the attractions in the capital city is a collection of white elephants. Under kings and dictators in the past, they were a sign that the country was peaceful and in good hands. Much of the international community feel that's the case now, but these are still early days in Myanmar's political transition. One obvious change is freedom of speech. Just a few years ago, under army rule, police would have met a protest like this with force and arrested those taking part. But following the political reforms, permission from the police is now granted sometimes. And with most men away working, it's the women who have taken up this fight against a copper mine near their village. The village has become something of a fortress, complete with revolutionary signs. The Chinese-backed copper mine is expanding quickly, and its owners want this land to dump waste material.
Our lives will be destroyed in an indescribable way if this project continues. Since we are farmers, we won't be able to survive without our land. That's why we're calling for a complete cancellation of the project.
They had a victory last year when they staged a long rally at the company offices. Police brought the protest to a violent end, but the government ordered the mine to suspend operations. A subsequent government investigation led by opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi recommended the mine should continue. In the meantime, it's closed and heavily guarded by police. Management wouldn't grant us an interview, but reports suggest the Chinese company is losing $2 million per month. It's become a sensitive issue in the area. Some villagers have accepted offers of jobs at the project and new houses paid for by the company. They say there are now deep divisions in the community.
There are now big problems among the people. If we want to go back to the old villages, we'll be chased away by those who have refused to move.
The protesting farmers have eked out a living in this harsh, remote environment for generations. They say they're not interested in jobs at the mine. They simply want to hold on to their land and way of life. In tune with the changes is the Yangon band's Side Effect. With censorship laws relaxed, love songs have given way to lyrics about politics and opportunity. But they believe some of the social changes taking place aren't necessarily positive.
Nowadays, there are more job opportunities, but they're more competitive, you know, and lifestyles become more complicated.
Most big business dried up under the previous regime and the resulting international sanctions. It left millions without jobs. Despite most sanctions being removed, many existing companies are still waiting for the boom. And even if it arrives, finding the right staff will be difficult.
Now Myanmar skilled workers are working in the neighboring country. So if the situation in Myanmar is better than before, I hope they will come back.
Corruption and a lack of infrastructure will also keep some investment away. Just as the government is trying to attract foreign investment, it cut the electricity to factories, leaving them to run on generators. They were hoping to avoid social unrest by saving enough power for domestic consumption. Paranoia in the military government about student uprisings meant higher education was discouraged. That's also changing, and students are positive about the future.
I think I will get a job after I graduate. There are many prospects in the private sector.
The members of Side Effect say their message to young people is to follow their dreams. Theirs is to make it big internationally.
One of the great Burmese band in the world. Do you know? No. It's Side Effect.
Wayne Hay for Counting the Cost, Al Jazeera, Myanmar.
So let's start bringing in our guests on Myanmar this week for the full picture, one each on business, economics and politics. First, business, and big businesses like Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Ford and Unilever have all taken tentative steps to enter the Myanmar market as the sanctions have eased. In fact, Coca-Cola just opened its first bottling plant some 60 years after it left the country and plans to spend $200 million more there. And AirAsia has also extended its presence in Myanmar. It now plans to start flights from Bangkok to Myanmar's capital of Naypyidaw. Of course, the aviation business is key to the growth of any country, so let's find out more about that with the Group CEO of AirAsia, Tony Fernandez, who's going to join us from the World Economic Forum meeting in Myanmar. And maybe, Tony, let's actually leave aside the fact that that's why you're there, you know, the World Economic Forum, and tell me, what are you doing there? How is business for you in Myanmar?
Well, we've been operating here for about a year and a half. It's been going very well. We operate about 7 flights a day from various points in ASEAN into Myanmar. Only airline flying to Mandalay, and yesterday we announced the first flight ever into Naypyidaw. So business has been good. We've grown from about 300,000 passengers a year to this year we could be touching about 500,000 passengers.
Did you always see Myanmar as a place that you wanted to get into, Tony, even during the sort of years when it was locked out to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it borders China and India. Now with us going into India soon, that's another exciting part. But it was, you know, it's a big population, 65 million people in, so one of the biggest countries in ASEAN, lots of tourism potential. And so it was always, you know, we always looked at it with relish and thought it would be great to get in there. And now with a growing middle class, there'll be a good outbound market as well.
Okay, so that's what Myanmar can offer you. What can you offer to Myanmar in return? I guess we're basically talking jobs here, aren't we? That's what everyone...
Well, I think jobs.
Yeah, that's what everyone's looking for, aren't they?
Yeah. Exactly, lots of jobs, both direct and indirect. Obviously direct being, you know, pilots, crew, and aircraft-related jobs, and obviously the economy. We are able to, around the tourism economy, if we bring in people, that's hotels, that's all the services related to tourism.
Well, bubbling along in the background, and maybe it shouldn't be in the background, Tony, is all the ethnic tensions and the religious problems that we certainly report a lot on the news. Does that concern you? You know, do you look at that and think, well, that really needs to be addressed before business can operate properly and ethically in this country?
Well, I mean, I think obviously, I mean, there are conflicts in a lot of places that we go to. I mean, Thailand's one of our largest markets, but there's conflicts there. There are conflicts in the Philippines. So Myanmar wouldn't be different to that. But I just heard Aung San Suu Kyi and the government of Myanmar talking about it. They're emphasizing the rule of law is most important. Like anything that's opening up, I think things will be solved. But it's beyond my scope. But certainly in the areas that we are going to, we feel quite confident that quite a big market and Myanmar's moving in the right direction.
Tell me about the World Economic Forum, Tony. It's obviously a very purposeful move to have such a big event there in Myanmar. What have people been talking about while you've been there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to applaud the World Economic Forum. I mean, some people are saying it's a couple of years early. I don't think so. I think you've highlighted Myanmar to the world's press are here. It's going to put pressure on the government for more reforms, and the world now gets to see Myanmar, and more importantly, I think Myanmar gets to meet the world and share views, exchange ideas, because they've obviously been, you know, ostracized for a long time, and they've been an isolation economy. They're playing catch up, and what I've seen is a government that's very receptive.
Is there actually enough to go around? I sort of worry that it, you know, might look like a great opportunity in Myanmar, but if everyone piles in at once, you know, will there be enough for all in the end?
That will have to be in each industry, in each market, in each company. Without a doubt, if there's too many people in here, then there's not going to be enough around. That's for sure. But you know, you've got to look at just Philippines is a great example. How a new president has changed that economy dramatically. I'm sitting here, and the government and the opposition are on the same panel. That wouldn't happen in many countries, where they're sitting on the same panel discussing, obviously with different views, but they're on the same panel. And I think that shows the power. You see a pretty free press here as well, and optimism. And so, yeah, there may be a lot of people coming in, and maybe there'll be some failures, but overall I think people will judge where they can go, and there's enough of a market.
And is it being managed properly? Because again, that could be a concern, that all of this happens too fast and it isn't properly realized.
Yes, I mean that's true, and there'll be troughs. I mean, if you look at India, everyone jumped on the low-cost bandwagon and so many failed. I see 7 airlines, local airlines in Myanmar, and I begin to wonder, is that too many for the local domestic market? But you know, I'm a believer in the free market. Capital will come in, capital will go out. We said we would never go into India. until the market cleaned up. We're now trying to go into India in the next few months. So there are going to be peaks and troughs, but things are moving forward, and I think that's the right way. Over control, over regulation is going to slow down things. Trying to plan everything and get it right isn't the right answer either. There's somewhere in the middle, but somehow I'm a believer the market will fix it.
Tony Fernandez, CEO of Air Asia. A pleasure talking to you. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Kamal.
Just worth making the point again that Tony Fernandez was joining us from a World Economic Forum summit being held in Myanmar, which really does say something about how much things have changed already. Al Jazeera spoke to another delegate at the forum, the former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark, who now heads up the United Nations Development Programme. Here she explains why it's important for an organisation like the World Economic Forum to engage with Myanmar.
Well, Myanmar's biggest challenge is how to eradicate this grinding poverty, and also to get permanent peace and justice settlements with the many people who've been in the areas of conflict, and there are still humanitarian crises. So there's a very complex transition going on here. It has political, economic, governance dimensions, it has humanitarian dimensions, peace and justice dimensions. I think it's good that the World Economic Forum has come to Myanmar as an emerging country, and so people can understand more about these processes and how they can be helpful.
Well, as far as understanding Myanmar's economics and its potential there, the McKinsey Global Institute's done an extensive job on that, probably the most comprehensive analysis of Myanmar to date. And I'm very pleased to say one of the authors of that report, Mr. Hang Chor, is joining us from the hot seat there at the World Economic Forum in Myanmar. We thank you for your time. Tell me, it's an incredibly extensive report. Why throw so much of your resource at Myanmar right now? Do you feel that the world needs a bigger picture on Myanmar?
We believe that Myanmar has a great growth potential by 2030. As you know well, the country has been the center of attention of many investors and companies all around the world for the past 1 year or so. We thought it would be useful to provide a fact-based and thorough perspective on what is the real potential of Myanmar going forward.
Do you have to be careful though, because all the talk we have about Myanmar is its growth and its potential and all these companies and all these countries that actually want to get in there. But can you risk almost overinflating the story and all those potential investors sort of get ahead of themselves?
Absolutely. I think one has to be quite realistic. Today, Myanmar's economy is quite very small. We have looked at all the details of the drivers of its economic growth, and we have tried to see what other countries in the same situations a few decades ago, like Thailand, like Indonesia, have gone through in terms of fueling economic growth. And we found out that there are quite reasonable levers for Myanmar to quadruple its economy and reach a 20 billion GDP by 2030. For example, Myanmar could diversify its economic base, branching out of agriculture and energy and mining, and go into manufacturing, infrastructure, services such as telecom, banking, consumer, and of course tourism. This expansion of its economic base would enable Myanmar to grow by roughly 8% over the next 20 years.
You use the word expansion there. I wonder if the word transformation would be more accurate. You know, the fact that what is primarily an agricultural-based economy will have to diversify and in the end almost completely transform itself. Do you think that Myanmar is capable of doing that?
It's a very important challenge that the country is facing now, and everybody is aware of that, right? Myanmar has a triple challenge: a need for installing political stability. It also has to negotiate the peace process with the minorities, and it has to put in place the fundamentals for its economy to grow. Those triple challenges are quite unique, and Myanmar leaders have to face all those in parallel at the same time. And that's why the task is quite monumental. But again, we believe that it's not completely impossible. This is something that other countries have done in the past few decades.
And a key part of that will be, as it is everywhere, employment. Now we know the sorts of numbers that Myanmar, well, that you think Myanmar can get as far as jobs go if its economy stays on this track. But how bad is the unemployment problem at the moment? Is it bad?
Today, Myanmar, roughly according to statistics available, employ more than half of its population. But the point is that the biggest chunk of that labor force is in the agriculture sector. And we think that Myanmar could not only improve the productivity level and the skills level in the agricultural sector, but also shift part of its labor force into more value-added sectors like manufacturing or infrastructure. The productivity level today of Myanmar is roughly 70% below its peer countries in Asia. It has to, of course, be improved.
Hang Cho from the McKinsey Global Institute with that very comprehensive report on Myanmar. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Right, so we've looked at business, we've looked at economics. That just leaves politics, which is where things can get a little murky in Myanmar. Critics will say the reforms aren't deep enough, that important issues like the conflict between Buddhists and Rohingya Muslims in the north aren't being addressed, and that all this hampers Myanmar's overall development. But they may also be heartened by the fact that Myanmar's famed democracy advocate Aung San Suu Kyi used the World Economic Forum to more formally announce she does want to run for president in 2015. The problem is the current military-drafted constitution actually blocks her from leading the country because her sons and her late husband are both British. Now, she can get around it though. Aung San Suu Kyi as president would probably be a huge plus for Myanmar, certainly for its international standing, because not all are convinced the current government's doing all it should, and that by investing in Myanmar, companies are actually turning a blind eye to bigger problems. Let's wade through some of that with Sean Turnell from Macquarie University in Sydney. He's joining us via Skype, an economics professor with plenty of experience and knowledge on Myanmar. Sean, one of our earlier guests today, Tony Fernandez from AirAsia, when I asked him about the political situation and the religious unrest, he essentially said, yeah, Myanmar's got its problems, but so have any number of others in the region, and really business does need to carry on. What do you make of that theory?
Well, I think that's right. The tensions have always been there. They've been exacerbated, of course, recently, and there are various issues going along. And, you know, it's most unfortunate, actually, because things other than that, of course, have been progressing quite well. So the timing of it is awful, but you know, hopefully with some economic growth and some liberal policies and perhaps some better political arrangements that we might expect in the near future, things might settle down a bit.
But there's a school of thought that the international community shouldn't be lifting sanctions and things like that until there is more political reform and more attention given to problems. And maybe lifting all these sanctions, etc., is actually part of the process.
Yeah, I think tensions like this are going to emerge at any rate, regardless of the issue about sanctions or not. I think, you know, there are significant issues, I think, here to do with remaining problems within the government apparatus, the extent to which, for instance, real democracy is actually in the places where some of the trouble is taking place. So, yeah, I think it is, though, one of those unfortunate things that you often see in transition scenarios.
There's been a lot of criticism of Aung San Suu Kyi and her, well, people call it silence. You know, that she's not speaking up enough about the Rohingya issue. Do you subscribe to that or understand where they're coming from?
No, I don't, actually. In fact, I'm somewhat bemused about the criticism about her so-called silence, because I, in fact, think she has not been silent at all. You know, she's in a difficult position for a start. I mean, she's not the government. She's just the opposition. She has very little resources and so on. But it seems to me that every opportunity she's been given to comment on the issue, she certainly referred to, you know, the problems of violence and her abhorrence of violence, the need for the rule of law, the need for equality, the need for broader democracy and accountability and so on. So I think the criticism, in fact, is a little bit too harsh.
So what's the key now going forward, Sean? The way Myanmar cooperates with the international community, the way the international community views Myanmar's actions in turn, what is the key to moving forward economically and politically?
Well, I think the key is greater liberalisation. They've made a number of great moves so far in the economy, but they're starting to run up against the old restrictions that are left over from the old regime. Some difficult choices ahead. In a sense, we're always going to get to this point where the difficult decisions are the ones that are left, but they need to push on. But it's not that difficult technically, because essentially what we're talking about is just giving the Burmese people greater freedoms.
Sean Turnell from Macquarie University in Sydney as part of our special look at Myanmar this week. Thank you, Sean. So something a little different for you this week, and if you want to revisit any of it, then head to aljazeera.com/business. You can link on to the Counting the Cost page from there to check out this and all of our previous episodes. And then please get in touch, won't you? You can either tweet me at Kamal AJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or just drop us an email, countingthecost@aljazeera.net. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santa Maria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.